Margaret's hands shook as she read the letter for the third time. The official letterhead of the law firm seemed to mock her from the kitchen table where she sat in her small apartment. The morning sun streamed through the window, but she felt nothing but cold dread spreading through her chest. Mrs. Margaret Okafor, the letter began, "We regret to inform you that your fiancé, Mr. David Asante, has been named as a defendant in a lawsuit regarding the misappropriation of funds from the Blessed Hope Children's Home, where he served as director from 1995 to 2010. The words blurred together as tears filled her eyes. David, her David, the man who had brought sunshine back into her life after 15 years of loneliness. The man who held her hand during evening walks and told her she was beautiful even with her gray hair and wrinkled skin. The man she was supposed to marry in just 3 weeks. Margaret set the letter down with trembling fingers and stared at the framed photo on her table. It showed her and David at her grandson's wedding last month, both of them smiling widely. She remembered how proud she had felt that day, introducing him to her family. How her daughter Sarah had whispered, "Mama, I haven't seen you this happy since Papa died." But now, sitting in the silence of her small kitchen, Margaret felt like her world was crumbling. The letter spoke of missing money meant for orphan children. Money that should have fed hungry mouths and provided school uniforms. Money that David was accused of stealing. Her phone rang, making her jump. David's name appeared on the screen, and her heart clenched painfully. She let it ring until it stopped, then ring again. On the third call, she finally answered. "Margaret, my love." David's familiar voice came through the phone. "I've been trying to reach you all morning. Are you all right?" "David," she whispered, her voice catching. "I got a letter today. From some lawyers." The silence on the other end stretched so long that Margaret wondered if the call had dropped. When David finally spoke, his voice was different. Smaller. Defeated. "I was going to tell you," he said quietly. "I've been trying to find the right words for weeks." "Tell me what, David?" "That you stole money from orphan children." "It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" Margaret's voice rose despite herself. "Because this letter says you took money that was meant to help children who had nothing. Children who needed food and shelter and hope." She heard David take a shaky breath. "Can I come over? Please. I need to explain this to you face to face." Margaret looked around her small apartment, at the wedding dress hanging in the bedroom, at the flowers David had brought her just yesterday. Everything felt tainted now, like a beautiful dream that had turned into a nightmare. "I don't know if I can look at you right now," she admitted. "Margaret, please. I love you. You're the best thing that has happened to me in my entire life. Don't let them destroy what we have." "They didn't destroy anything, David. You did." After she hung up, Margaret sat in her kitchen chair for a long time, staring at nothing. At 68 years old, she had learned to live with loss. She had buried her husband of 42 years. She had watched her friends pass away one by one. She had made peace with the idea that her life would be quiet and solitary until her own time came. But then David had appeared at her church 6 months ago, newly moved to the neighborhood. He was a widower too, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. He brought her flowers after the third Sunday they sat together during service. He walked her home and asked if he could cook dinner for her the following week. For the first time in 15 years, Margaret had felt alive again. She had felt desired. She had felt hope. Now, as she looked at the legal letter spread across her table, she wondered if everything had been a lie. Had David seen her as an easy target? A lonely widow with her deceased husband's pension and the small inheritance he had left her? The afternoon passed in a blur of phone calls. First, her daughter Sarah called, having heard about the lawsuit through mutual friends at church. "Mama, I never trusted that man," Sarah said, her voice tight with anger. "There was something about him that didn't feel right." "You never said anything," Margaret replied weakly. "I didn't want to hurt you. You seemed so happy. But Mama, men like that, they target women like you. Lonely women with money saved up." Next, her son Michael called from the city. He had seen the news story online. "Mama, you need to cancel that wedding right now. This man could be dangerous." "He's not dangerous," Margaret said. though she wasn't sure she believed it anymore. "Mama, he stole money from orphans. What kind of man does that?" By evening, Margaret felt exhausted and confused. She had turned off her phone to stop the constant calls from concerned family members and friends. She sat in her living room, surrounded by wedding preparations that now felt like decorations for a funeral. A soft knock at her door made her look up. Through the peephole, she could see David standing on her doorstep, holding a small bouquet of the white roses she loved. He looked older than his 70 years, his shoulders bent with the weight of whatever he had come to tell her. Against her better judgment, Margaret opened the door. "Thank you," David said simply, "for letting me in." They sat across from each other in her living room, the coffee table between them feeling like an ocean. David twisted his hands in his lap, and Margaret noticed how they shook slightly. She had always thought it was just his age, but now she wondered if it was guilt. "I need to tell you about Emma," David began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Emma? My daughter. The one I never told you about." Margaret felt her heart stop. In all their months together, David had told her he had no children. He had said it was one of his greatest regrets, that he and his late wife had never been blessed with a family. It was something they had bonded over, since Margaret's own children lived far away and rarely visited. "You have a daughter?" Margaret's voice was hollow. David nodded, tears beginning to flow down his weathered cheeks. "She was born with a condition, a rare disease that required constant medical care. The treatments were expensive, and my wife's insurance wouldn't cover them." Margaret said nothing, waiting for him to continue. "Emma was dying," David whispered. "The doctors said she had maybe 6 months without the treatment. My wife was falling apart. I was desperate. So you stole from the orphanage." "I borrowed it," David said quickly. "I always planned to pay it back. I took the money over several months, just what I needed for Emma's treatments. I kept detailed records. I was going to replace every cent as soon as I could. But you never did." David's face crumpled. "Emma died anyway, despite all the treatments, all the money, all the hope. She died 3 weeks before her 8th birthday." Margaret felt her anger waver slightly, replaced by a deep sadness. But she forced herself to remember the children who had gone without because of David's choice. "What happened to the money?" she asked. "After Emma died, I couldn't face what I had done. My wife blamed me. She said I had stolen from innocent children for nothing. She left me and moved to another city. I had a breakdown. I ended up in the hospital for months." David looked up at Margaret with eyes full of pain. "By the time I was well enough to deal with the world again, there was an investigation. I had lost my job, my home, everything. I couldn't pay the money back even if I wanted to. So you ran away. I moved here to start over. I changed my name legally, became David Asante instead of David Okonkwo. I thought if I could just disappear, maybe I could find some peace." Margaret stared at the man she had planned to marry. Everything about him was a lie. His name, his past, his claim to have no children. Even his grief, which she had thought she understood, was built on a foundation of deception. "And then you met me," she said quietly. "Yes, and for the first time in 20 years, I felt like I could breathe again. Did you think about telling me?" David was quiet for a long moment. "Every day. But I was afraid you would leave me. I was afraid I would lose the only good thing I had left. So instead, you decided to lie to me, to let me plan a wedding, to let me fall in love with someone who doesn't even exist." "I exist," David said desperately. "My feelings for you are real. My love for you is the most honest thing about me." Margaret stood up slowly, her joints protesting. She walked to the window and looked out at the street where she and David had taken so many evening walks. Every memory now felt contaminated. "I need you to leave," she said without turning around. "Margaret, please." "I said leave." She heard David stand up, heard his footsteps move toward the door. But then they stopped. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," he said quietly. "But I need you to know that meeting you saved my life. For 6 months, I remembered what it felt like to be a good man. Margaret didn't turn around. She heard the door open and close, heard David's car start and drive away. Only then did she let herself cry. But as she stood at her window, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Margaret realized that her tears weren't just for her broken heart. They were also for David, for the pain that had driven him to such desperation. They were for Emma, the little girl who had died despite her father's sacrifice. They were for the orphan children who had gone without because of one man's impossible choice. And somewhere, buried beneath all the hurt and betrayal, was a tiny seed of something Margaret didn't want to acknowledge. Something that felt dangerously close to understanding. 3 days passed before Margaret could bring herself to leave her apartment. She had called in sick to her volunteer job at the local library, unable to face the questions and pitying looks from her colleagues. Her daughter Sarah had driven down from the next town, bringing groceries and a determination to help her mother see sense. "You're well rid of him, Mama," Sarah said as she put away the groceries. "Can you imagine if you had married him? You could have been charged as an accessory or something." Margaret sat at her kitchen table, still in her nightgown at 2 in the afternoon. "It doesn't work like that, Sarah." "Well, whatever. The point is, he's a criminal, a thief, and he lied to you about everything." "Not everything." Sarah paused, a can of soup halfway to the cupboard. "What do you mean?" "He loved me. That part was real." "Mama, how can you say that? He was probably just after your money." Margaret thought about this. She had wondered the same thing over the past few days. But she remembered the way David had looked at her, the way he had held her hand during movies, the way he had listened to her stories about her late husband without jealousy or impatience. "I don't think so," Margaret said quietly. Sarah sat down across from her mother. "Mama, I'm worried about you. You're defending a man who stole from orphans." "I'm not defending him. I'm trying to understand him." "There's nothing to understand. He's a bad man who did bad things." Margaret looked at her daughter, seeing the same black and white thinking that had made their relationship difficult over the years. Sarah was a good woman, but she had never experienced the kind of desperation that could drive someone to impossible choices. "Have you ever had a child who was dying?" Margaret asked. "What? No, of course not." "Then you don't know what you would do." Sarah's face hardened. "I would never steal from orphans, Mama. No matter what." "Are you sure?" The question hung in the air between them. Margaret watched her daughter's certainty waver slightly, saw her imagining her own children in danger, saw her consider what lengths she might go to save them. "It's different," Sarah said finally, but her voice was less sure. "Is it?" After Sarah left, Margaret found herself thinking about Emma, the little girl she had never known existed. She tried to imagine David as a younger man, watching his daughter suffer, knowing that money could save her. She tried to imagine the weight of that choice, the terrible calculation of one child's life against many. It didn't excuse what he had done, but it explained it in a way that made Margaret's heart ache. That evening, she did something she hadn't done in years. She went to the internet cafe in town and searched for information about David. It didn't take long to find the old newspaper articles about the scandal at Blessed Hope Children's Home. The stories painted David as a villain, a man who had callously stolen from those who needed help most. But Margaret also found Emma's obituary, a small notice in the same newspaper, dated just months after the scandal broke. Emma Okonkwo, age 8, beloved daughter of David and Grace Okonkwo, died peacefully at home after a brave battle with crab disease. Margaret stared at the tiny photo of a smiling little girl with her father's eyes. She read about Emma's love of drawing, her favorite stuffed elephant, her dream of becoming a teacher. She read about the courage she had shown during her illness, the way she had comforted other children in the hospital. The money David had stolen had bought Emma months of life. It had given her time to draw pictures and play with her stuffed elephant. It had given her parents time to hold her, to tell her stories, to say goodbye. Margaret left the internet cafe with tears on her cheeks and a heavy heart. She walked through the town square, past the church where she had met David, past the restaurant where they had shared their first dinner. Everything reminded her of him, of the life they had planned together. She found herself standing outside the flower shop where David had bought her roses every Friday. Mrs. Chun, the elderly owner, saw her through the window and came outside. "Margaret, dear, I'm so sorry to hear about your troubles," Mrs. Chun said gently. "I saw the news about your fiancé." "Thank you," Margaret replied, not knowing what else to say. "He was a good customer," Mrs. Chun continued, "always very particular about getting just the right flowers for you. He told me once that you deserved beautiful things." Margaret felt fresh tears threaten. Did he ever talk about his past? Mrs. Chun considered this. "Not much, but I could tell he was a man with heavy burdens. There was sadness in his eyes, even when he smiled." "Yes," Margaret whispered, "there was. He loved you very much, you know. I've sold flowers to many men over the years, and I can always tell the difference between duty and love. With David, it was love." Margaret thanked Mrs. Chun and walked home slowly. As she climbed the stairs to her apartment, she found a small envelope tucked under her door. Inside was a key and a note written in David's careful handwriting. "My dearest Margaret, I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I am leaving town tomorrow. I can't bear to stay and watch the pain I've caused you. This key is to a storage unit downtown. Inside, you'll find everything I own of value. I want you to sell it all and donate the money to Blessed Hope Children's Home. It won't replace what I took, but it's a start. Please know that loving you was the best thing I ever did. David." Margaret stared at the key for a long time. Part of her wanted to throw it away, to pretend she had never seen it. But another part of her, the part that had loved David despite everything, needed to know what he had left behind. The next morning, Margaret took a taxi to the storage facility. The unit was small and neat, containing furniture that looked expensive, several paintings, and boxes of books. In the corner sat a cedar chest that looked handmade. Inside, Margaret found photo albums, letters, and a small jewelry box. The jewelry box contained a simple gold bracelet with a single charm, a small elephant. Margaret recognized it immediately from Emma's obituary. This had been his daughter's, probably her most precious possession. As Margaret looked through the photo albums, she saw David's life unfold in reverse. Pictures of him alone in various apartments, looking older and sadder with each passing year. Pictures of him with a woman who must have been his wife, both of them looking strained and exhausted. And finally, pictures of Emma. The little girl was beautiful, with David's gentle eyes and a smile that seemed to light up every photograph. Margaret saw her at birthday parties, at the hospital, at home with her parents. She saw the progression of her illness, the way she grew thinner and frilier, but somehow kept smiling. In the last album, Margaret found a letter in Emma's childish handwriting. "Dear Daddy, I know you are sad because I am sick, but I am not scared. Mommy says I will go to heaven and watch over you. I want you to be happy. I want you to find someone nice to take care of you. I love you very much. Emma." Margaret pressed the letter to her chest and wept. She wept for Emma, who had died too young. She wept for David, who had carried this grief for 20 years. She wept for the children at the orphanage who had suffered because of his choice. And she wept for herself, for the love she had lost just when she had found it again. As she packed everything back into the boxes, Margaret found something else. A small notebook filled with calculations, page after page of numbers showing how much money David had taken and when. At the bottom of the last page, written in red ink, was a total $47,000. But there was more. Attached to the notebook was a bank statement from just last month. David had been saving money, putting away every penny he could. The account balance was $23,000. Margaret stared at the numbers. David had been trying to pay back what he had stolen. It would have taken him years, maybe decades, but he had been trying. She thought about the modest apartment where he lived, the simple clothes he wore, the way he had always insisted on paying for their dates despite clearly having little money. He had been living like a pauper, saving every cent for the children he had wronged. Margaret left the storage unit with more questions than answers. She drove past David's apartment building, but his car was gone. According to his note, He had left town that morning. She might never see him again. That evening, Margaret sat in her living room, surrounded by the remnants of her broken wedding plans. The flowers had wilted. The cake had been canceled. The dress hung in her closet like a ghost. Her phone rang. It was her son Michael, calling from the city. "Mama, I've been thinking about what you said," he began. "About not knowing what we would do if our children were in danger." "Yes. I looked up that disease, crab disease. It's terrible, Mama. Children who have it, they suffer. A lot." Margaret waited for him to continue. "I keep thinking about my own kids, about what I would do if they were sick and I couldn't afford to help them. And I realized, I don't know. I honestly don't know. Few of us do until we're tested," Margaret said quietly. "Does that make what he did right?"
No.
"But it makes it human." After Michael hung up, Margaret sat in the growing darkness, thinking about forgiveness and redemption, about the weight of impossible choices and the price of love. She thought about Emma's letter, about David's TW. She thought about the fact that she was 68 years old, that she had lived through her own share of heartbreak and loss, that she understood the way life could corner you and force you to choose between bad and worse. And she thought about the $23,000 in David's bank account, the money he had saved to try to make amends. The money that proved he had spent 20 years haunted by what he had done. Margaret picked up her phone and dialed the number for Blessed Hope Children's Home. When the director answered, she took a deep breath. "Hello," she said. "My name is Margaret Okafor. I'm calling about David Asante. I believe I have something that belongs to you." But even as she made arrangements to donate David's possessions to the orphanage, Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that this story wasn't over. That somewhere out there, a broken man was driving away from the only happiness he had found in 20 years. And despite everything he had done, despite the lies and the betrayal and the money stolen from innocent children, Margaret found herself wondering if forgiveness was possible. If love could survive the weight of truth. If a man who had made one terrible choice in a moment of desperation deserved a second chance at happiness. As she hung up the phone, Margaret realized that she was about to make a choice of her own. A choice that would define the rest of her life, and possibly David's too. She just wasn't sure yet what that choice would be. Margaret didn't sleep that night. She sat by her window, watching the empty street and thinking about David driving through the darkness, believing he had lost everything that mattered. By dawn, she had made her decision. She called her daughter Sarah first. "Mama, it's 6 in the morning," Sarah said, her voice thick with sleep. "I'm going to find him," Margaret said simply. "Find who?" "Mama, what are you talking about?" "David. I'm going to find David and bring him home." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Margaret wondered if Sarah had hung up. Finally, her daughter spoke, her voice tight with disbelief. "You cannot be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. Mama, the man is a criminal. He lied to you about everything. He stole money from orphan children. He was a father trying to save his dying daughter. That doesn't make it right." Margaret stood up and walked to her bedroom, where her wedding dress still hung in the closet. She touched the soft fabric, remembering the joy she had felt when she bought it. "Sarah, do you remember when Tommy was born?" she asked, referring to her daughter's first child. "What does that have to do with anything?" "He was premature. The doctors said he might not make it. Do you remember what you said to me in the hospital waiting room?" Sarah was quiet. "You said you would do anything to save him. Anything. You said you would sell your soul to the devil if it meant Tommy would live. That was different. That was just, I was scared. And you were honest. Most parents would say the same thing. The difference is most of us never have to choose." Margaret pulled the wedding dress from the closet and laid it on her bed. She was going to wear it today, but not for a wedding. She was going to wear it for something more important. "Mama, please think about this," Sarah pleaded. "Even if you forgive him, how can you trust him? How can you build a life with someone who lied to you about everything? Because I understand why he lied. And because I know that the love between us was real." After she hung up with Sarah, Margaret called her son Michael. He was more understanding than his sister, but equally concerned. Mama, I get it. I really do. But even if you can forgive him, what about everyone else? The whole town knows what he did. Are you prepared to deal with that? I'm 68 years old, Michael. I don't have time to worry about what other people think. But what if he doesn't want to be found? What if he's moved on? Margaret thought about this. It was possible. Maybe David had decided that their relationship was too damaged to repair. Maybe he had chosen to start over somewhere else, alone. Then I'll know I tried, she said. Margaret spent the morning calling every hotel and motel within 100 miles of town. David's car was distinctive, an old blue sedan with a dent in the rear bumper, and she hoped someone would remember seeing it. On her 15th call, she struck gold. Yes, we have a David Asante registered here, the desk clerk at the Riverside Inn said. But he checked out about an hour ago. Said he was heading to the bus station. Margaret's heart raced. The bus station was only 30 minutes away. If she hurried, she might catch him. She called a taxi and spent the ride praying that she wouldn't be too late. The taxi driver, a young man named Joseph, seemed to sense her urgency. Someone important? He asked, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. Very important, Margaret replied. Well, don't worry. I know a shortcut. The bus station was small and crowded. Margaret pushed through the crowd, her eyes scanning every face. She was beginning to lose hope when she saw him, sitting alone on a bench near the departure gate, a small suitcase at his feet. David looked older than she remembered, his shoulders bent with defeat. He stared at the floor, lost in his own thoughts. Margaret's heart clenched at the sight of him. She walked over slowly, her heels clicking on the concrete floor. When she was close enough, she sat down beside him on the bench. David looked up, and his face went through a series of emotions. Surprise, hope, fear, and finally, resignation. Margaret, he whispered, what are you doing here? Stopping you from making another mistake, she said. I'm not making a mistake. I'm doing what I should have done 20 years ago. I'm disappearing. Margaret reached into her purse and pulled out Emma's bracelet, the one with the small elephant charm. She held it out to David. You forgot this, she said. David's eyes filled with tears as he took the bracelet. You went to the storage unit. I did. I saw everything. The photos, the letters, the bank statements. Then you know I was trying to pay it back. I know. I also know that you've been living like a pauper to do it. David looked at the bracelet in his hands. It's not enough. It will never be enough. Maybe not, but it's a start. They sat in silence for a moment, surrounded by the noise of the bus station. Other travelers hurried past them, focused on their own destinations, their own lives. I called the orphanage, Margaret said finally. I'm donating everything in the storage unit to them. Your furniture, your books, everything. David nodded. Good. That's good. I also told them about the money you've been saving. They want to meet with you. David looked at her sharply. What? The new director, Mrs. Adebayo. She wants to talk to you about setting up a payment plan for the rest of the money. They would do that? They would. But David, there's something else. Margaret turned to face him fully. I talked to some of the older staff members who worked there when you were director. They remember you. They remember how much you cared about the children. David's face crumpled. That makes it worse, not better. No, it makes it human. Mrs. Adebayo said something that stuck with me. She said that good people sometimes do bad things when they're desperate, and that forgiveness is possible when someone truly wants to make amends. What are you saying? Margaret took a deep breath. I'm saying that I forgive you. I'm saying that I understand why you did what you did, even if I can't condone it. I'm saying that I love you, David Asante or David Okonkwo, or whatever your name is. David stared at her in disbelief. How can you forgive me? I lied to you. I stole money from children. You lied to me because you were afraid of losing me, and you took that money because you were trying to save your daughter. I can't say I wouldn't have done the same thing in your position. But the wedding, the plans we made, are still possible. If you want them. David was quiet for a long moment. In the distance, they could hear the announcement for his bus. The one that would take him away from this town and away from Margaret forever. I don't deserve your forgiveness, he said finally. None of us deserve forgiveness, David. That's what makes it grace. David looked at the bus, then at Margaret. What about your family? Your friends? They'll never accept me. Some will, some won't. But that's their choice to make. This is mine. What about the town? The scandal? Margaret smiled sadly. Do you think I care what this town thinks? I'm 68 years old. I've buried a husband, raised 2 children, and lived through more heartbreak than most people can imagine. I'm not going to let fear of gossip keep me from love. David reached out and took her hand. I love you, Margaret. I love you so much that it scares me. Then don't get on that bus. What do we do? How do we move forward from this? Margaret stood up and smoothed her dress. We start by going home. Together. We face whatever comes next together. David looked at his suitcase, then at the bus that was beginning to board passengers. What about the money? The orphanage? We'll work out a payment plan. It might take years, but we'll do it together. And the wedding? Margaret smiled, the first real smile she had felt in days. We'll have a small ceremony. Just family and close friends. People who understand that love isn't perfect, but it's worth fighting for. David stood up and picked up his suitcase. Are you sure about this? Really sure. I'm sure. They walked out of the bus station together, leaving behind the life David had planned to start over and choosing instead to rebuild the one they had almost lost. The taxi driver, Joseph, was waiting outside, having sensed that his passenger might need a ride back. Everything work out? He asked as they got into the car. Yes, Margaret said, squeezing David's hand. Everything worked out. 3 months later, Margaret stood in her small living room, adjusting David's tie. Today was the day they would meet with the board of directors at Blessed Hope Children's Home to finalize the payment plan for the remaining money. You look nervous, she said gently. I am nervous, David admitted. These people have every right to hate me. They might, but they also have the right to forgive you. Let's see which one they choose. The drive to the orphanage was quiet. David gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. Margaret watched the familiar countryside pass by, thinking about how much their lives had changed in such a short time. The wedding had been small and simple, held in Margaret's living room with just immediate family present. Sarah had come, though she remained distant and suspicious. Michael had walked Margaret down the aisle, and his children had served as flower girl and ring bearer. It wasn't the wedding Margaret had originally planned, but it was perfect in its own way. The orphanage was a modest building surrounded by a playground where children's laughter could be heard even from the parking lot. Margaret felt David tense beside her as they approached the entrance. We can do this, she whispered, taking his arm. Mrs. Adebayo met them in the lobby. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. Mr. Asante, Mrs. Asante, thank you for coming. They followed her to a conference room where 3 other board members waited. Margaret recognized one of them, Mr. Okafor, an elderly man who had been involved with the orphanage for decades. David, Mr. Okafor said, standing up. I worked here when you were director. I remember you. David looked terrified. Mr. Okafor, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what I did. Sit down, my boy. We have much to discuss. For the next hour, they talked about the past and the future. David explained about Emma, about the desperation that had driven him to take the money. He showed them the detailed records he had kept, the calculations he had made trying to figure out how to pay it back. The total amount taken was $47,000, Mrs. Adebayo said. You've already contributed $23,000 through the sale of your possessions. That leaves $24,000. I can pay $200 a month, David said. Maybe more, depending on my work situation. That would take 10 years, one of the board members pointed out. I know. But I'm committed to paying every penny back. Mr. Okafor leaned forward. David, I need you to understand something. What you did was wrong. Children went without meals because of your choices. That's a fact we can't change. David nodded, his face pale. But, Mr. Okafor continued, I also need you to understand that you're not the first person to make a desperate choice for their child. And you won't be the last. What are you saying? I'm saying that we accept your payment plan, but we also want to propose something else. Mrs. Adebayo spoke up. We want you to come back and work with us. Not as director, but as a volunteer. Help us with the children who have lost their parents. Help us prevent other families from facing the desperation you faced. David stared at them in shock. You want me to work here? After what I did? Because of what you did, Mr. Okafor said. You understand loss in a way that most people don't. You understand the weight of impossible choices. That makes you valuable to us. Margaret felt tears in her eyes. This was more than she had dared to hope for. I don't know what to say, David whispered. Say yes, Margaret said softly. Say yes to a second chance. David looked around the room at the faces of the board members. He saw judgment, yes, but also compassion. He saw the possibility of redemption. Yes, he said finally. I would be honored. 2 years later, Margaret sat in the garden behind the orphanage, watching David read a story to a group of children. His voice was animated as he acted out the different characters, and the children giggled with delight. He's good with them, said a voice behind her. Margaret turned to see Mrs. Adebayo approaching with 2 cups of tea. He is, Margaret agreed. He has a gift. The children love him. They don't know about his past, of course, but they sense that he understands their pain. Margaret accepted the tea gratefully. How is the payment plan going? Very well. He's actually ahead of schedule. Between his volunteer work here and his part-time job at the library, he's been able to pay more than the minimum each month. That's David. He feels the weight of what he did every day. Mrs. Adebayo sat down beside Margaret. Can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you ever regret your choice? To forgive him, to marry him? Margaret considered this. It had been a difficult 2 years. Some people in town still whispered when they walked by. Sarah had slowly come around, but it had taken time. There had been moments of doubt, moments when the weight of David's past had felt almost unbearable. No, Margaret said finally. I don't regret it. Love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about choosing to love someone despite their imperfections. And David? How is he handling everything? Margaret smiled as she watched her husband finish the story and hand out small toys to the children. He's healing. Slowly, but he's healing. Every day he works here, every payment he makes, every child he helps. It's all part of his journey back to the man he was meant to be. As if sensing her gaze, David looked up and waved. Margaret waved back, her heart full of love for this complicated, broken, redeemed man she had chosen to spend her life with. That evening, as they sat on their small porch watching the sunset, David took Margaret's hand. I have something for you, he said. He pulled out a small wrapped package. Inside was a simple gold necklace with a small pendant in the shape of a heart. It's beautiful, Margaret said as he fastened it around her neck. I wanted to give you something that wasn't tainted by my past. Something that's just ours. Margaret touched the pendant gently. David, your past isn't something to be ashamed of anymore. It's part of your story. It's part of what makes you who you are. A man who stole from orphans. A man who loved his daughter so much that he was willing to sacrifice everything for her. A man who spent 20 years trying to make amends. A man who found love at 70 and wasn't afraid to fight for it. David was quiet for a moment. Do you think Emma would have approved of you? Margaret smiled. I think Emma would have loved me, and I think she would have been proud of the man her father became. As the stars came out, they sat together in comfortable silence. 2 people who had found love in the most unlikely circumstances. They had faced the weight of truth and chosen forgiveness. They had looked into the darkness of the past and decided to step into the light of the future. Margaret's love story hadn't ended the way she had planned. It had been messier, more complicated, more painful than she had ever imagined. But it had also been more real, more meaningful, more profound than anything she had ever experienced. At 68, she had learned that love wasn't about finding someone perfect. It was about finding someone worth fighting for, someone worth forgiving, someone worth choosing every day despite their flaws and failures. And as she looked at David, his face peaceful in the starlight, Margaret knew that she had chosen well. Their love had been tested by fire and had emerged stronger. It had been broken and rebuilt. It had been questioned and defended, but it had endured. And that, Margaret thought as she squeezed David's hand, was the most beautiful love story of all.